want to talk about Penny Wong, who has once again miserably failed us on the world stage, as she has done since October 7, 2023, abandoning long-standing ally in Israel, and clearly does not have the Australian values at heart, because it's now been revealed that the Foreign Minister failed to meet with Israeli representatives on a United Nations trip last year. But let me tell you, who did Penny Wong meet with? Well, she met with representatives from Iran. Yes, you heard that correct. Iran, as in one of the Western enemies, one of Australia's enemies. And she also met with the Palestinian Authority. Now, let's not forget, that authority supported the October 7 attacks, where more than 1,000 Jews were slaughtered, women were tortured and raped, and hostages were taken. Yet Penny Wong, somehow, somewhat light bulb moment went off, and she felt it would be appropriate to meet them. And she also, at the same time, demanded that the Jewish homeland halt its military actions against terror groups Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, we've got some audio of Penny Wong being asked about this in Senate estimates, and this is what she said.
Did you have any meetings with Israel's representatives or ministers or leaders?
My recollection is the Foreign Minister of Israel did not attend. Had the Foreign Minister attended, I would have had that opportunity.
Did you seek a meeting with Israel or Israel's representatives?
Well, my counterpart didn't attend.
But, I mean, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu was there. The Israeli permanent representative is obviously there.
Well, Senator, I would usually engage with counterparts.
I mean, the phone. What exactly were you looking at, Penny Wong, when you were looking down at your phone? Were you looking back at your calendar to find out who you met with on that certain date? Now, remember when Penny Wong called for restraint? Was it restraint enough to catch up with Iran, with the Palestinian Authority? Was it restraint enough to see the bodies of the Bibas children in caskets being paraded through the streets and with a baying mob around them? This is just... I'm actually quite offended. I think this is once again another example of Penny Wong selling out our values for votes on the world stage. Iran is our enemy. Let's not forget that. Iran is the enemy of the world. The Palestinian Authority supported the terrorist attacks, and Penny Wong once herself shows us to be completely out of depth on the world stage.
Yeah, at some point you've got to ask yourself, is the Foreign Minister of this country a national security risk when she would prefer to meet with Iran, who are the major sponsors of terror in the Middle East? At the time she met with Iran, they were helping their proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, fight Israel, the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, and incidentally our ally. And yet, as I said, she preferred to meet with Iran than with anyone from Israel. And so the other question you've got to ask is, whose interests does Penny Wong actually represent as our Foreign Minister? I certainly wouldn't suggest they are mainstream Australian interests, and nor would I suggest that they are Australian security interests, especially when you consider that the director of ASIO recently said the biggest problem in this country now in terms of national security is racism directed towards a particular race, and that is towards Jews in this country. Penny Wong is only making it worse by clearly showing the hand of this federal Labor government that they are very much supportive of Israel's enemies. There are now so many reasons to ditch this federal Labor government. I'm losing count of them.
Oh, well, I'm glad you started counting in the first place. I didn't think that was even necessary to be, we're just living in it, right? But, I mean, it's just piss-poor diplomacy, isn't it? If you're going to go to the UN and say, we believe that there must be Palestinian statehood, and as she has said in her speech, you know, this is not just, you know, a means to an end anymore. This is a central part of achieving peace, is that we will have Palestinian statehood. And you're willing to meet with Iran and you're willing to meet with the Palestinian Authority. Do you not owe it to Israel to go to them and say, look, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to say? You've given that courtesy to the people who are clearly going to agree with you. You won't give that courtesy to the people who will disagree with you. Instead, you just rock up and will blindside them when I give the speech. Now, that excuse she gives, oh, well, their foreign minister didn't attend. Therefore, you know, I couldn't possibly talk to anyone else. That's like me saying, well, you know, I had a fine to pay and I called up and the bloke whose name was on the piece of paper wasn't there, and then they, well, why didn't you pay? Well, I couldn't speak to the bloke who I was meant to talk to. I'm sure there's someone else around. Netanyahu was there, etc. Yeah. She could have made every attempt to talk to them, to meet with them, and she didn't do it. Maybe, just a little bit, Wong knows in her heart of hearts that this is a very hard message to sell. She is selling the message of the Labor left. I'm not saying she doesn't believe in it. She does believe in it. But she is selling the message of the Labor left that parts of her own party have major problems with, and she can't even face up to defend her own point of view to an ally. Seriously?
Don't forget, when she went to Israel, she refused to go and visit the scene of the October 7 attack as well. So she's got a history of avoiding things that she would rather just not acknowledge. And you pointed it out, Danica, and watching that vision from her in Senate estimates where she's answering questions while on her phone, just the disdain for the process and for having to be accountable to the Australian public as Foreign Minister for your behaviour is just quite shocking.
But also, if you are a Jewish Australian, to watch the Foreign Minister sit there on her phone like this, more engaged in whatever's going on there than actually addressing what was serious questions put to her by Dave Sharma. As a Jewish Australian, you want to know the answer. You want to know why she was not available, apparently, to meet with Israel on this important trip. It is another betrayal of Jewish Australians by this Labor government.
She was on her phone reading Al Jazeera. That's what was happening.
Or perhaps like our colleague Jo Hildebrand, she was sitting there playing Candy Crush. I'm not sure which would be worse, to be honest, but, I can't meet with someone because my counterpart... I mean, please, come on. You think we're going to buy that one? While we're talking about Penny Wong, she's fronted up to Senate estimates, of course, as you just saw, and we also got a bit of more information about what's been going on with these Chinese warships. Now, we know that they were floating down the east coast of Australia last week. Then they had a live artillery exercise on Friday that we learnt of through Virgin Airlines because they were flying overhead and then phoned it through to Air Services Australia, who then phoned it through to the ADF, and then an hour later the New Zealand military picked up on it and they phoned it through to the ADF. And at no point during this did we, Australia, they're only 100 kilometres offshore, we didn't know what was going on. So we heard from Air Services Australia at Senate estimates the other day. Well, yesterday the ADF rocked up. Admiral David Johnston corroborated this version of events, that the way we learnt about it was by a Virgin pilot flying overhead, hearing a message from the Chinese ships and sending it back. Take a look.
The notification was that call that had made from when the firing window opened, and that, in our view, is inadequate notification as well.
That's not inadequate, it's after it started.
The range of the radios depend on where the aircraft is and where the transmitter is, so there may have been earlier calls made from the vessels that the Virgin aircraft had not heard.
I understand that, but what's the value of a notification if it's not received, if it's not heard?
And here's Penny Wong essentially suggesting, yes, there was notice. No, there wasn't, because we relied on a Virgin pilot to realise it. But, it could have been done a bit better.
So we were provided advance notice?
Both statements are correct.
It's not the same thing to say we received notice and there was no advance notice provided, which is what you have said, compared to what the Prime Minister has said.
So it is correct that China gave notice. We have issues with the timeframe around that and the channel, and we have expressed that to them.
How did they give notice if we only learned of the exercises after they had commenced?
It's a very good question, Senator Patterson. Look, put it this way. If I decide I'm going to come round to your place for dinner and I tell you 5 minutes after I walk through the front door that I've come to your place for dinner, would you consider that notice? No, I think most of us would think notice would be to call up and say, hey, are you free for dinner tonight? Not, apparently, when the Chinese do things. As a reminder, this is what the Prime Minister said last Friday.
Well, China issued, in accordance with practice, an alert that it would be conducting these activities, including the potential use of live fire. It is the case that the notice was given. When that occurs, airlines are notified and stay out of the area. Air Services Australia also has been informed.
I mean, it's a blatant lie. They didn't give notice that they would be doing it. They were already doing it. We got notice, quote unquote, afterwards. They were simply telling us what they were doing. And yet Wong and the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, today were still running interference for the Prime Minister. No, he got it right.
So it is correct that China gave notice. We have issues with the timeframe around that and the channel, and we have expressed that to them.
The Prime Minister made clear that there was a notification from the Chinese, but in the same breath made clear that that notification was inadequate.
I mean, please, inadequate. It came after the fact, Mr. Marles. Marles went on to say that it wasn't a real incident. I mean, I don't know what a real incident is. And he also let us know that there has been an Australian ship shadowing these Chinese ships, HMAS Stewart. And these things are now down near South Australia. They could well be circumnavigating the country. They'll be up around WA next. But we've had a ship shadowing them, and we didn't know this was going on. We find out after the fact, and we still, a week later, have Wong and Marles standing there saying notice was given, notification was given. How do they think we believe this?
Is there anybody in Labor right now, one, that has any idea about national security, and two, is there anybody in Labor who has actually any idea what's going on right now, full stop? Because what's clear is the left doesn't know what the right's doing and the right doesn't know what the left's doing. We now know that there was no warning. Firstly, China gave no warning of these live fire drills, which tells you everything you need to know about Beijing's contempt for this country. And they've got our poor old Albo, the handsome boy from Australia, exactly where they want the handsome boy.
Sorry, just to interrupt. Did you notice that Albo said, though, they said there was the potential of live firing.
There was a potential, but
that's a new one.
I was just going to say, then it was alerted by a Virgin Australia passenger jet.
Yeah.
And then you've got Albo the other day, on Friday, mumbling, fumbling, bumbling with his usual basically saying that China acted in accordance with practice, contradicting what we've got from the Chief of the Defence Force. And then the most hilarious part out of all this, and this is very serious, actually not funny, they trot Richard Marles out today to do the television rounds, and Marles says, well, we don't actually know if they did conduct a live exercise.
Correct.
I mean, for goodness sake, is there anybody in Labor that could possibly provide Australia with a clear answer? Do you know what's going on? Are we under threat? And if so, what are you going to do about it? Because they're going round and round in circles. I mean, can you imagine if this happened in China's waters? If an Australian, we conducted live fire exercises in Chinese waters, it would be a disaster. They would be coming after us, yet the Prime Minister, Marles, Wong and the rest of the clown brigade are just fobbing it off to each other.
In answer to your question, is there anyone in Labor? There is. It's Kim Beazley, but unfortunately he's long gone.
He's arguably the greatest Labor Prime Minister we never had.
Yes. Yeah. But, I mean, this thing just gets worse, right? So you mentioned Richard Marles, the Defence Minister. I mean, he said that Australia was providing unprecedented surveillance of these ships. And I thought he was joking, but it is unprecedented. It's unprecedented to be surveilling ships and you learn that they fired live rounds after the fact through second-hand channels. That is unprecedented. No other country does surveillance like the Labor government does surveillance. But it gets even worse than that. He then says he did not accept that New Zealand should have told the Australian Defence Force that there was live fire being conducted between our two countries sooner than they did. It was like, 90 minutes after the event that eventually New Zealand got around to telling us. And Richard Marles says, no, that's not a problem. I would have thought it was. And then he went further again, and when journalists pointed out the obvious, if this is an exercise, what would have happened if it was for real? Mm-hmm. And he says, I don't accept that there's any comparison between that. If it was a real situation, it would be completely different, which begs the question, in what way? How? And so this just goes from bad to worse, and we look like an absolute joke of a nation. The United States, who are trusting us with their military secrets, remember, regarding nukes and subs, must be watching this fiasco thinking, who the hell have we gotten to bed with regarding defence?
But also, God help us in the event of an actual war. we would be screwed if nobody knows what's actually going on with a live fire exercise.
Well, we would know after we were invaded.
We would know after. I mean, they would be on our lands attacking us, and then Albo would go,
We'd get a call from Virgin head office.
Hang on, we weren't given notice, I think, that we weren't going to be attacked.
Well, was it last night or the night before I said we'd find out because the local Aboriginal people in WA had put a couple of drones up and worked out that they'd been on land for 4 days. But you know, you'd say, what must the US think of this? What do you think China thinks of this? I mean, they have proven the point, right? All they had to do was send 3 ships down the coast, not even in Australian waters, in international waters.
They haven't done anything
They haven't done anything legally wrong, but that's sort of beside the point because we know what happens when we fly around international airspace over the South China Sea. We get flares thrown at us, but that's by the by. But China and Xi must be sitting there going, my God, we have scared the willies out of the people of Australia and we have their government bending over backwards to pretend that there is nothing wrong with this. They have, with those 3 ships, proven the point that we will do anything to keep China happy. And I think that's probably the most important part of all of this, is that they've just shown we can do whatever we want. There are no consequences for it.
Yeah, 3 Chinese ships in the Tasman, and it's Anthony Albanese who is all at sea.
Yeah.